we're too mechanical as well, no? And sometimes a lot of us are guilty with that. We become too mechanical with the things that we are doing, and um, it loses the human factor. It loses the human connection of the entire process. Even if we're doing assessment at this point, remember that you are dealing with a human being, that you are there with them in that process as another person, as another soul, not just simply gathering data, but ultimately listening to them and tuning in to ensure that they are listened to ensure that they are that you are capturing everything without giving the impression that you are just there to gather data and information. Remember that they came to you as a human being and you have to meet them as a human being as well. Because sometimes, because of the mechanicalness, the mechanical aspect of the assessment process, which is kind of difficult to do because being mechanical is embedded in the assessment process. But what we're saying is that give that added level of care because we are, again, mental health practitioners, mental health professionals, and we are there to meet the client as a human being, as another soul in the process. All right. So, what is the purpose of the clinical interview? So, by the end of the intake, you should have a working understanding and not a final diagnosis. As what I have mentioned earlier as well, just like behavioral observation, you are there not to understand, no? You are there to make sure to capture everything descriptively and not to infer or form judgment at that point. Same as with the intake interview, you are there to have a working understanding, meaning that is still changeable in the process. You should have a working understanding and not a final diagnosis because we're not diagnosing at this point. We are there to understand the client. We are there to um, make sure that we are able to gather as much information as we can. So in this phase, you have to identify the presenting concern, gather relevant history, essentially understand their context, begin case conceptualization, and assess immediate risk if present. Like say, for example, is there a or are they considering hurting themselves? Are they posing danger or harm to themselves or other people? And how can you make sure to spot that, to catch it, and make sure to come up with a safety planning as early as possible. Safety plans save lives. No, it really is a game changer and a life changer in the entire clinical life cycle. So, in reiteration, by the end of the intake, you should have a working understanding and not a final diagnosis. So, establish a therapeutic relationship and gather pertinent information regarding the clients or the patients. No, interchangeable words, but two different things. Their history, symptoms, and goals. Again, that's something that I wasn't able to distinguish earlier as well. When we think of service users, that's more contemporary, that's a more contemporary um, description to refer to our clients. In the not so contemporary times, when we talk about patients, they are just there receiving from their provider, and the relationship is not collaborative, it's one-sided. Whereas if we refer to them as our clients, it's more collaborative and they are actively informed and engaged in the entire treatment process. So those are the distinguishing characteristics of what it's like to be a patient or a client. But ultimately, patients and clients are our service users, one of our stakeholders and service users. Because we have a myriad of stakeholders and service users still. So what are the key elements no of the intake interview? So you have to take note of the presenting problem versus history versus the background. No, clarify the distinctions between the three. No, what's their issue? What's issue is such a strong word. What's their problem? What's their presenting concern? What's their presenting problem? What's their history? What's their context? And what's the backdrop? What's the background in which all of these are happening? So the background is essentially the context and not just information about their presenting concern. So intake is both structured and flexible. That's why our intake interviews are oftentimes, you got it right, it's semi-structured because it allows us to have um, naatay initial questions wherein we have initial questions wherein we base off our um, inquiry, our initial inquiry with our clients or service users. But at the same time, if their particular response would require elucidation or it would require elaboration, that's when we ask follow-up questions that are not previously written in our interview guide. So semi-structured interview combines the both the positive aspects of the structured and unstructured interviews. Why? Because we have a set of questions to begin with, but again, in the event that the responses of our clients would require further inquiry, it would allow us to ask questions that were not previously written. So again, you have to take note that not all information is equally relevant. You have to decide what matters clinically. Because if you would just take note of the miscellaneous things, if you would just um if you would just take note of the miscellaneous things, the details, just the small details, it would appear as if you're just gossiping rather than data gathering about the case of your client. So avoid maritessing, no, avoid um like there is a huge disparity between plain gossip and gathering information about your client. Because if you would dig deep on the juicy things, the essentially the tea, if you just focus on that, that's no longer interviewing, that's no longer intake, but rather you're just gossiping about the life of your client, and you have to avoid doing that as much as possible. So when does this occur, no, in the clinical life cycle? So again, the patient or the client intake process typically occurs at the beginning of the client intake process and immediately following behavioral observations. Again, behavioral observation is developmental. Even if you're already doing your intake, you have to take note of your behavioral observations in your clinical notes. You have to make sure to take note of those. Like say, for example, when they responded to this particular question, what's their affect? No, how did this make the client feel? What emotions were evoked during the narration or the when the client was answering this particular part of the intake interview. So again, it sets no the stage for further assessment by providing crucial context about our client or service user. Now, as we proceed, again, I would just like to reiterate that um, behavioral observation, intake interviewing, and mental status examination, um, they do not exist in silos. No, it's not one process after the other, but they are complementary and they are developmental in nature. So from the start that you have seen your client, your patient, or your service user, you're already taking notes in your behavioral observation. You start even before you start your intake interviews, ask them to like fill out forms for their safety and your safety as well. Then you do your clinical interview, but still at the same time observing your client. So it's developmental, and that is carried out, no, in you conducting your mental status examination. Now, what is mental status examination? Mental status examination, or more commonly known to us as MSE, it's easy to get a hold of an MSE form online because they are available online. There's MMSE. You can come up with your own. There are guidelines written online in health websites and whatnot. These are the particular aspects that you have to include whenever you are doing your mental status examination. But what truly is MSE and why is it important? Now, MSE is not history, it is a snapshot of what is happening right now. So, say for example, when we do background information, intake interviews, it's more of um, a deep dive into the client, whereas mental status examination is the here and now. No, that's very existential. The here and now, what's the current status and condition of your client. So sometimes what the clients show you contradict what they say. That's what I have mentioned earlier, that um, how they present themselves is much more important than what they say they feel at that moment. So again, that's where our clinical judgment would come in. And mental status examination is a structured way of organizing observations and responses. It focuses on current functioning, the here and now, and it's not historical. Again, it is a snapshot, a current in a way situation or about what is happening right now with your client or service user. So mental status examination, or MSE, again, by definition, is a clinical tool used to assess a client's mental state at a specific point in time. So it is important to emphasize that this is not about the client's history, but rather it is about how they are functioning in the present moment. We give premium, we put more importance on what they are currently going through right now or how they present themselves at the moment, rather than, um, say, for example, how they are doing in the past few days or in the past month. Although those kinds of contexts are important, especially when we will be doing our um, tawag ani, we'll be doing our other assessment tools in the process, no? Because, like, say, for example, for the diagnosis and whatnot, the duration, which is one of the 5 Ds of abnormality, is very much important in distinguishing whether or not a behavior portrayed is an abnormality or not. So again, the MSE brings together our observations and the client's responses across different areas, including cognitive, emotional, and behavioral functioning. So the structured approach helps us organize what we see and hear into a clearer clinical picture. So again, it allows us to be informed of the client's context, no, and how they are performing at the moment. All right. So moving forward, why MSE is important? Because it allows us, no, to provide insights, not really provide, but capture insights into the client's thought processes, emotional state, and cognitive capabilities. It aids us in identifying mental health disorders as well and monitoring treatment progress. It would inform us, no, at this point, it would inform us, it would allow us to think of particular tests that we can consider. No, it would allow us to think of particular tests, for example, or other assessment tools that would allow us to really pinpoint and really determine what are the issues, where is this stemming from, and if there is a need for diagnosis. So again, MSE assesses psychological functioning, identify abnormalities, and aid in diagnosis and treatment planning. So again, it translates our raw observations into something that is clinically meaningful. So where are MSEs usually used? Of course, it's not really a no-brainer because not everyone knows this. Of course, in our clinical practice, in training in grad school, we use MSE, right? So I, for one, I have been introduced to MSE not in college, but in grad school already. So sa grad school na ko nakatuon. So it's in grad school that I have had an understanding of why MSE is important. Unlike in the undergrad, wherein the discussion of MSE is just, in passing, just a bit in the um, neuropsych portion of most assessment textbooks. In grad school, it is imperative, especially before you do your interventions, before you even do your assessments, before formal assessments, before you do your diagnosis, you come up with a diagnosis and intervention. So MSE is important in these particular settings, no? So other settings, I'm sorry, other settings that MSE is used are in psychiatric hospitals, for examples, outpatient clinics, emergency rooms, and even in the primary care setup. While the core structure of MSE remains the same, how it is applied may vary differently depending on the setting and the client's needs. So, for example, in emergency settings, the focus may be more immediate and brief, while the outpatient or therapy setting, the assessment can be more detailed and ongoing. So, something that has been um, advocated to be done by a lot of clinicians is that you do MSE every time that you have a contact with your client, because that would, again, in the essence of being developmental, that would inform, no, that would inform your intervention and ultimately your results or reports afterwards. So it's not just a one-shot thing. It has to be conducted as often as possible and each time that you have a contact with your client as well. So the mental status examination usually starts with a general description of the client. Now, this includes how they appear, how they carry themselves, and how they behave during the session. Why is that? Why is it important? No, so it starts with a general description. Why do we take note of all of these things? Because primarily, again, this would inform um, the choice, for example, the choice of assessment tool, and this would clarify what the client might be actually undergoing. Is there a is there an organic source of such behaviors? Like, say for example, is there a specific part of the brain that is responsible for the alteration of their behavior and whatnot? If they're not able to write or to reproduce a Bender Gestalt card, for example, towards the end of your MSE, or if they do not know how to reproduce accurately a clock in the clock drawing test, a clock that says 10 minutes past 9, what does that say about the cognitive functioning of your client? No, so again, it allows us to infer what the client is actually going through. So at this point, again, we're not making generalizations, but we're gathering still information. We simply establish a baseline, and for example, we might note how the client is dressed, whether they appear well groomed, and how they make eye contact or how they respond to the environment. Like, say, for example, it's not normal for a client to appear before you in a consult dressed in a wedding gown, for example. Or say, for example, um, you have to take note whether or not the client is disheveled. Are they well groomed? Do they have halitosis, for example? Do they have body odor, for example? Because that would give us a glimpse of whether or not they are still capable of taking care of themselves or not anymore. So again, um, what am I pointing out with those particular um, presentations, no behavioral presentations? Because again, some disorders, like say for example, those that are in the psychotic and other schizophrenia related na disorders, those domains of functioning are affected. And therefore, it would allow you to have a bit of an insight, no, what your client is actually going through. So again, this would definitely inform, no, the MSE definitely informs how you would proceed further if the client, for example, would be needing um, thorough assessment, and then based on the assessment, would they be needing psychological intervention or would they be needing further psychiatric support at this point? So the initial description becomes important because it sets the tone for the rest of the assessment. It gives us an overall sense of how the client is functioning at the moment, which we then explore further in the succeeding domains of the mental status examination. So such domains, for example, are the appearance, no? This is something that you observe, but you do not generally um, you can generally explore. You can ask, how have you been taking care of yourself recently? For example, you're still able to eat on schedule, their own schedule, because we have different schedules of eating. For example, those that are working graveyard, they might have a different notion of what regular eating is in their context. No, or say, for example, they're following specific fads according to nutritionists and dietitians in when it comes to dieting. No? So that has to be taken into consideration as well. So again, the appearance refers to observable factors. I'm sorry. Observable factors such as hygiene, clothing, and posture. So we have to notice if there are discrepancies in these areas. And again, these can provide insights into the client's mental health and overall well-being. Like say, for example, clients experiencing extreme symptoms of depression or depressive tendencies, or some psychotic and schizophrenia related disorders, they might not be able to take care of themselves. No, so but also that would also lead us to, again, if these are like worst case scenarios, of course you won't be able to ask follow-up questions like how are you able to take care of yourself and whatnot, because most likely, but not all the time, because they have they have instances of lucid mental functioning. They might not be able to take care of themselves all the time, no? So, and therefore sometimes negative symptoms in schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorders might hamper the way that they would respond to other people as well. So they might not be able to respond because they are experiencing limited speech, alogia, for example, and other A's in the negative symptoms. So motor behavior, no, sorry. Motor behavior assesses the patient's physical activity levels and coordination. So this includes evaluating whether the client displays cooperation or agitation, which may indicate underlying emotional states. Also, like say for example, are they showing or portraying say for example, catatonic posture, for example, or catatonic stature, for example. Do they appear agitated? Are they knee jerking more than what you see is, or what you clinically see as normal, for example? Do they have like twitching in other parts of their bodies? Um, are the way that they breathe, dili ba naga-expand ang ilang chest, ilang shoulders, and whatnot. No, so those are the things that you have to take note during um, this part of your MSE. You have to take note of their motor behavior as well, and you have to take note of that as part of your behavioral observation, of your clinical notes. So speech, no, in mental status examination, for a while. All right. Again, speech, it focuses on how the client communicates during the session. This includes um, aspects such as fluency, volume, tone, and the overall flow of their speech. You have to take note of the content of what they are saying, but at the same time, the paralanguage, no? The rise and fall of their voice, the tone, how is this said? Do they appear angry? No? Yeah, in that kind of setup. I'd just like to verify, have I been disconnected or my audio is clear ba?
All clear pa naman, Doc. You can
Okay,
still
good. All right. I'm sorry about that. Naga flash na your connection is unstable. Anyways, in relation to that, in relation to what the content, no, what is being said, the content is very important as well. We observe whether the client speaks clearly and at a typical pace, or if they are noticeable, or if there are noticeable changes, such as very slow. Is their speech rapid, as if someone is running before after them? Is their speech soft? Is it labored? Is it pressured? No, those are the things that you have to take note. So these variations can sometimes reflect underlying concerns. So for instance, slowed speech may be associated with low energy, but it can also be associated with serotonin and dopamine functionings, or the rise and fall of these neurohormones and neurotransmitters in the brain. So you know that in your abstract. So say for example, another example, rapid or pressured speech may suggest heightened emotional states. No, or say for example, are um, they do not communicate outwardly that they are distressed, but the way that they are speaking communicates that they are in a distressed situation. So you have to be mindful and take note of those things as well. So another facet of the MSE is the attitude. So when we talk about, again, MSE, we are referring to how the client relates to us during the session. This is their overall, I'm sorry, attitude, no? Overall attitude, whether or not they have a positive or negative attitude. This does not just this does just not tawag ani, inform our report, but also would give us a bit of an insight whether or not how interventions would play out later on. Like, say, for example, counseling or therapy, how would they respond to that in the process? So again, this gives us information about their level of cooperation and their overall engagement. So for example, a client may be open, cooperative, guarded, suspicious, or even resistant. No, so if a client is resistant, then you have to ask, is the client self-referred? Are they coming in the assessment out of their own volition, or are they being forced, to undergo this intervention or this assessment start? No, this assessment. Like, say for example, are they just faking good or faking bad? No, is the client um to be able to get out of rehabilitation as soon as possible? Are they doing impression management? Are they just faking good? No, but later on, you would know, when they would go out of the rehabilitation, there might be instances wherein they would go back to their old level of functioning. Yun. So again, we have to take note of that and make sure that, um, because a lot of some of our clients, not a lot, no, in some cases and not all the time, they might display manipulativeness, no, because they are able to get something out of doing that particular behavior. So, excuse me. These patterns give us insight into how the client is experiencing the interaction with them, our interaction with them, and sometimes how they relate to others more generally. So while positive and cooperative attitudes may suggest comfort and openness, a withdrawn or apathetic stance may signal underlying concerns that needs further exploration. Or it can also be that if they are overly positive about it, it can be that they're trying to get your attention, for example. That might be a start of dependency. Because again, diba, in counseling or psychotherapy, one of our aims is to um, terminate the session as much as possible, because we don't want our service users to be attached to us. We have to make sure that they are living their lives based on their own terms, own pace, and in an autonomous fashion. So again, sometimes when they portray being overly positive, that might also be counterproductive in the process. So you have to be wary and take note of those as well. Not really very wary, but make sure to, as much as possible, just take note of those things. Because again, this would inform ultimately the entire clinical processes that we are doing with a particular client. Another aspect of the MSE is orientation. So again, this has something to do with the client's awareness of basic aspects of reality. Like, say, for example, person, place, and time. Usually we abbreviate it as PPT, person, place, and time. Um, are they aware of who they are talking to? Do they know themselves? Do they know the other person? A person, that's a person. Place, do they know where they are? Specific building, specific establishment, city, no, and time. What day is today? What date of the year? And what year is it? Usually those are the types of questions that we ask to gauge and assess orientation. So in practice, we are looking at whether the client knows, again, who they are, where they are, and what is happening around them. So again, this is important because orientation allows a person to function effectively in their environment and interact appropriately with others. When there are difficulties in orientation, such as confusion, for example, that might point out to possible cognitive concerns that need further assessment. So it allows you to paint a picture of the client. Like, say, for example, elderly woman appears to be disoriented, doesn't know their name, doesn't know where they are, doesn't know what time of the day or date it is as of the moment. So again, that would inform you of what particular psychological concerns the client might be going through at that time and at that specific moment. So another aspect, excuse me, another aspect of the MSE is the short-term memory. One question that I ask my clients, no, whenever I administer the mental status examination, is at the beginning. Usually, MSE ranges at around, depending on how your client would respond, at around 5 to 8. I would say on average, 5 to 8 minutes. So, say for example, at the start of your mental status examination, ask your client to recall, say for example, three objects, basic three objects. The usual question or the usual things that I would ask my client to remember is remember Black Dog, White Rose, Santa Ana Avenue, Davao City. I ask that in the beginning, and I ask them to repeat that again after around 5 to 8 minutes, basically towards the end of the MSE. So that would give you an insight whether or not their short-term memory is intact. No, so again, our everyday situations, um, short-term memory allows us to follow, say for example, certain conversations, remember instructions, or retain small pieces of information like phone number, for example. And during the assessment, we look at how well the client may take in new information and recall it after a short delay. So difficulties in short-term memory may suggest challenges in attention, concentration, or broader cognitive functioning, which may affect day-to-day activities. Like say, for example, the conversion from short-term to long-term might be short-term to long-term memory might not be as efficient, or say, for example, from sensation to perception, it might not be as accurate. Therefore, there might be something wrong, not really something wrong, but something that needs to be checked, something that has to be checked with how they take in information from their environment. Like say, for example, hearing, seeing, tasting, tactile. No? So all of those things you have to, because again, the connection is that we take in information from our environment, we make sense of that through perception. From perception, it transforms now to short-term memory to long-term memory, short-term memory to long-term memory, tawag ani, it's murag scaffolded in a way. Mura siya og kanang assisted by rest and sleep, no? So there might be something that needs to be checked with the senses, for example. If they're not able to appropriately, um, recall information during, like say for example, in such a small span of time. Imagine you ask that in the beginning, like after around 5 to 8 minutes, you ask them to repeat the same thing. If they're not able to repeat them or to reproduce those things, that might give us an understanding that there might be challenges when it comes to their attention, concentration, or broader cognitive functioning. So functioning of the frontal and prefrontal lobes of the brain. So Physiopsych 101 again. Long-term memory. What are the questions that I usually ask when I ask this particular portion of the MSE? Um, a lot of you might have had a chance to graduate in senior high. So some of you might have graduated senior high school via online or platform like this. So sometimes the questions that are not really standard, but the choice of questions provided to gauge long-term memory is, say for example, where did you have your graduation in high school? Or say for example, how did you celebrate your 18th birthday? Those are questions related to long-term memory. And again, this has something to do with the client's ability to store or retrieve information over extended period of time. So this includes personal experiences, learned knowledge, and skills acquired throughout life. So in contrast to short-term memory, which focuses on recent information, long-term memory allows us to understand the client's history, such as past events, education, or significant life experiences. That's why, if you have noticed, the way that I ask my questions, where did you have your high school graduation? Or, say, for example, how did you celebrate your 18th birthday? Those are, again, in relation to past experiences, long term past experiences, and significant life events. Because again, if they are important, if these are significant to you, the more chances that they would also be stored in your long-term memory. So during assessment, we may explore how accurately and consistently the client can recall information from the past. So this gives us insight into their retention and access to stored knowledge. So difficulty in long-term memory may point to broader cognitive concerns such as um, gaps in recall of important personal and historical information. That might also lead us to, like, say for example, if there are portrayed observed brain fogs, no, in talking about long-term and short-term memory, um, there might be instances wherein it might be because the client did not have enough rest and sleep prior to going to the assessment. So you have to understand the context of your test, your client as well. Because again, ultimately, these things are affected by rest and sleep, or generally because there's a concern with their sleep quality, particularly like certain dysomnias, no, or their quality of sleep is affected by certain parasomnias or abnormal happenings or events during during their sleep, no? So you have to ensure as well na those contexts are not really managed but taken into consideration, because at the end of the day, very important, we're not just individuals, we're not just human beings, but we are human beings in context. So say for example, you might be like this as a person, so on and so forth, but ultimately in the grand scheme, the debate of nature versus nurture, biology sets the stage, but again, we are molded as well by our contexts, by our several social contexts. That's why you have to take those things into consideration with your clinical practice in the future. So math, na day math sa MSE. So usually, what are the questions that I ask when I give out this particular portion of the MSE? Usually, kwarta, money, di ba? Mukhang pera. Usually, I ask, uh, how many 25 cents are there in 3 pesos? But I find that kind of question in a way kind of problematic, not really problematic but challenging, I would say, especially with the newer generations, because they don't as often, no, they're not as exposed to these kinds of things like 25 cents, or say for example, other questions in the MSE: what would you do if you find a stamped letter in the pavement or in the sidewalk? Like some newer or some younger clients that I would have would ask, what's a stamped letter? They're not familiar with that. Sometimes as well, I'm not familiar with 25 cents. I'm not familiar with 10 cents. That's why straightforward asking numbers, like say for example, what's 9 plus 8? Or say for example, what's 10 times 3? No, so those are math questions, mathematical abilities that we are gauging. We are looking at the client's capacity for basic calculation and numerical reasoning. So again, this area reflects logical and analytical thinking, particularly how well a person can process and manipulate numbers. So in our context, in our practice, we might ask simple tasks such as basic arithmetic or problem solving questions to get a sense of their functioning in this domain. You can be creative whenever you are asking this particular domain. Like, say, for example, Jack has 10 apples and they gave five. Jack gave five to Anna. How many apples does Jack have left? So it can be like that as well. You can be creative, especially with younger clients. But not really a standard, but the one that I have been using is like the 25 centavo question. Like, how many 25 cents are there in 4 pesos? So usually those are the questions that I ask. You can be creative about it. It can be straightforward arithmetic questions, plus, minus, multiply, divide. And again, what is this particular domain actually trying to communicate with us? No, difficulty in performing even simple calculations, especially when it is inconsistent with a client's background, may suggest possible cognitive concerns. Um, Inconsistent with the client's background. In our clinical practice, it's not all the time that our clients are capable of reading and writing. So if they are capable of reading and writing and they are not able to perform simple mathematical arithmetic questions, again, that might give us a bit of a context as to what particular concerns they are experiencing. But if a client does not know how to read or write, or say, for example, it has been established from the very beginning that they're not able to perform simple mathematical calculations, then it's going to be futile to ask this particular portion of the MSE. Word finding. No, so word finding refers to the person's ability to retrieve the right words during a communication. So in some cases, clients may know what they want to say but have difficulty expressing it clearly. This is what we refer to as word finding difficulty or anomia. No, so during our session, we pay attention to whether the client struggles to find words, use vague terms, or frequently pauses while speaking. So these patterns can give us insights into language functioning, and in some cases may be associated with cognitive concerns. But you have to ensure as well that you are administering this particular domain of the MSE in a culturally sensitive manner. So you don't ask them, like, say, for example, the usual questions that we ask for word finding is name as many colors as you can, or say, for example, um, colors, other than colors, fruits or vegetables. No, so you have to administer it in a sense that you are being culturally sensitive as well. Make sure na if it has been established from the very beginning that the client is not able to speak in English, no, you have to accommodate and make sure that you're asking your MSE questions in a language that your client is able to understand. No, because again, this would gauge whether or not they actually know certain components or certain domains that we are asking them to um, responses. No, we're asking responses out. So attention and concentration, again, this refers to the client's ability to focus, sustain that focus, and process information over time. So in our sessions, this may be observed through how well the client follows the conversation, stays on topic, and responds to questions without becoming easily distracted. It can be that um, there are instances wherein they would portray tangentiality or circumstantiality. You're asking one thing, but they're responding with another. No, so you have to take note of those things as well, and if they are able to follow simple conversations. We also use simple tasks to see how consistently they maintain attention, and difficulties in attention and concentration can affect how a client engages in therapy later on, and may be associated with conditions such as anxiety, depression, or attention related concerns, like, say, for example, ADHD. um, they're not able to follow, or, like, say, for example, they're jumping from one topic to another. Definitely that would inform your clinical judgment later on, and basically think of ways in which you can tailor fit your further assessment, because it's not going to be productive to just give out tests without proper contextualization and without tailor fitting the that the tests and assessment tools that we will be providing to our test takers. Dili siya pwedeng a one size fits all. No, it cannot be just morphogenic in general. It has to be tailored fit. It has to be ideographic. It has to be ideographic and morphogenic rather than nomothetic. That's what I was trying to say. Yun. So again, this gives us insights whether or not na by depressive symptoms ang client, if they are not able to answer, like, provide their full attention. It might be that their attention is divided. They're focusing on other things. They might be experiencing certain anxieties and whatnot, and attention related concerns such as ADHD. But ADHD is such a strong word. ADHD symptoms, rather, no, symptoms of these kinds of um, things, behaviors. All right, so naming objects. The question that I usually ask is, I usually wear a wristwatch. So I ask my client if they know that particular object and name a particular part of that object. So sometimes wristwatch, of course, what are the parts of a wristwatch? Of course, you have the strap, you have glass, you have the cover, you have the short hand, the long hand, the minute, the hour hand, and the second. No, so those are particular parts, no, of the of a particular object, such as the wristwatch. But you can also ask other objects and ask your client a particular part of that object. Excuse me. So this is particularly just a simple task. However, it involves the integration of both memory and language skills. The client needs to recognize the object and then retrieve the correct word for it. Now, during our MSE, we may ask the client to name familiar objects either in the environment or through pictures. So if you choose to do it in pictures, make sure that that's already prepared with you. Sometimes in our assessment or in our MSE, we integrate technology. We bring with us iPads, or, say, for example, we print out pictures. That's also acceptable. But sometimes 3D objects or live objects can also be very useful, such as the wristwatch. Yun. So what are the difficulties in naming objects actually tell us, no? So, say, for example, they might be having concerns or issues when it comes to language processing or retrieval, and in some cases associated with other neurological concerns. So following commands, how do I demonstrate? How do I um, ask my clients to follow commands? Sometimes it starts with, not sometimes, the way that I do it, I start with one command, two commands, then three commands. Like, say, for example, put your left point finger on your right cheek. No, so it has to be like one after the other. Like, say, for example, raise your left hand, form a fist, and um, use your right point finger to point to the ground. So two commands, three commands. Sometimes as well, Like say, for example, take this paper, fold it in half, go to the back of the room and turn twice, then go back to your seat. So increasing siya in nature. It has to follow like one command, two commands, then three commands. So again, this area helps us assess both comprehension and the ability to translate that understanding into action. So this gives us insight into cognitive functioning, particularly the areas such as attention, language comprehension, and executive functioning. So in writing, sometimes the instruction that I would give my clients is write the sentence, "It is a hot summer day." Usually that's how I give out my writing item for the MSE. So it can be like that. You can make use of that sentence, or you can also come up with your own. So it has to be contextualized as well. Like say for example, if it again, so what I have mentioned, if the client establishes from the very beginning that they're not able to speak in English, of course it's going to be insensitive for you to ask the client to write something in English. So make sure to be sensitive and contextual in your demonstration or in rolling out your mental status examination. So again, simple sentences, just like what I have given as an example. It is a hot summer day. Capitalizations, are they correct? Periods, since declarative sentence man siya, did they end with a period, a question mark, or an exclamation point? Is the capitalization correct? Letter I in it is a hot summer day. S for summer because summer is um, proper, no? Summer, winter, autumn, and summer, winter, fall. Yun. Tama ba? Apat, four seasons. Yun. So, um, proper siya. That's why it has to be capitalized. So, difficulty in writing can reflect challenges in language, motor coordination, or broader cognitive functioning. Apart from instructions, apart from language, it also assesses whether or not there is a problem with fine motor skills. Writing is a fine motor task, same as with lacing beads or what are other fine motor tasks. Like say for example, making use of pegboards, no, to assess fine motor skills. But those are the common tasks. You're hitting two birds with one stone when you are asking, when you are demonstrating or when you are rolling out this domain. Other than language and other cognitive functioning, you're also testing for fine motor ability and whether or not there's a problem with that with your client. So spatial orientation, usually the question that I ask for my client in this particular domain is, say for example, you would go out. I would ask my client, say for example, you went out, you went to the mall to go shopping. Um, you went out to the mall, you rode, say for example, a taxi, a tricycle, a habal-habal, or an ongbak. So you have to be contextual as well. Okay, say for example, here in Davao, of course, we have taxis, but in other localities and municipalities, they don't have taxis with in them, no? So you have to contextualize that. Like say for example, you ask, say for example, ni adto ka og merkado, ni sakay ka og ongbak pauli sa inyong balay. Unsaon nimo paghatag og instruction sa driver gikan sa merkado padulong sa inyuhang balay. So that is spatial orientation. No, so you can contextualize it like say for example habal-habal or say for example taxi. No, spatial orientation again it has something to do with a person's ability to understand where they are in relation to their surroundings and how they move within that space. So in our context, no, in administration in MSE, We observe how the client moves, how they position themselves, and whether they appear aware of their surroundings. Sometimes it can be conducted in vivo as well, like instead of imaginal, instead of very a cognitive performance in that sense. You can ask your client to demonstrate that in the room or in the clinic, for example. So what are what can we get actually no what can we actually get out of administration this particular domain? So difficulty in spatial orientation can affect mobility and safety, and as the person may have trouble navigating familiar or unfamiliar environments, especially for say for example assessments in geriatric settings. Like say for example, competent pa ba gihapon? Is the client still competent to be left on their own, or would they be needing assistance in their daily living? So again, it would inform your final report later on. It would inform the assessment tools, other assessment tools and tests that you will be giving to your client. And ultimately, it would all of the things that we have discussed, no, all of the things that we have covered this afternoon, they will definitely inform your assessment, diagnosis if needed, the intervention that you will be doing, and the assessment that you will be doing, whether or not to see if everything that you have done is actually effective or helpful for the client. And with that being said, um, before I end, last day, we have abstract reasoning. Although this is also tested in cognitive ability tests. No, I have my students here in the PhD for cognitive assessment. One part of the domains that we are checking in for cognitive assessment is abstract reasoning. So abstract reasoning refers to the client's ability to think beyond concrete information and identify patterns, relationships, or underlying meanings. So this includes interpretation of similarities, understanding metaphors, or solving problems that require flexible thinking. One question that I usually ask um, for this particular domain in the MSE is, excuse me, what do you mean by the saying, those who live in a glass house should not throw stones? Or another question that I would sometimes ask is, do not do unto others what you don't want others to do unto you. Or the positive na iteration of that statement, do unto others what you want others do unto you. So again, ask the client to interpret that. What do they mean by that? Sometimes it can be riddles, it can be proverbs, it can also be sayings, no? So this area is important because it reflects higher level thinking, particularly the ability to adapt, reason, and make sense of complex situations. So all in all, those are the facets, no, of the mental status examination. And I'd like to reiterate once more that when we do behavioral observation, intake interviewing, and mental status examination, they do not exist in silos. They do not exist in sequence, but rather these are developmental processes that significantly overlap with one another and can that has to be done simultaneously as much as possible instead of doing it um, in sequence or one after the other. And with that, I end my presentation this afternoon, and I hope again you were able to pick up a thing or two from the things that I have shared, uh, albeit virtual. So thank you, and once again, maayong hapon sa tanan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Banghiles, for that insightful and practice-based discussion on behavioral observation, intake interview, and mental status examination. Of course, as clinicians and future clinicians, today's discussion is essential, no? To our field, we must be observant, gather relevant information with the utmost care, and uphold the highest ethical standards in our practice. Once again, thank you, Doc, for sharing your experiences and expertise.
At this point, we will be having a 5-minute wellness break. Please take this time to stretch, hydrate, and relax.
We will resume shortly, so kindly stay connected.
For our announcement, you may ask